But now I want your calls on this. Is feminism bad for young men? So young women are now earning 9% more than young men, according to the Centre for Social Justice. Here we go. We've got some boards here just in case you're not getting it. Young women now earning 9% more. They found that since 2022, 16 to 24-year-old women in full-time work earn £26,500. But the average man makes just £24,000, a difference of about £2,000. And on top of this, a study by Ipsos has found that 1 in 5 British men, 17%, believe that women's rights have gone too far. Women's rights have gone too far. So we're asking, has feminism had a negative effect on young men? Is it feminism itself that has caused this, do you think, Geoff?
Well, if feminism is the claims of women to social, political and legal equality, I think most modern people in their right minds wouldn't have an issue with that. I suppose there's been something else that's emerged, particularly from the middle part of the last decade, which was a view of maleness as a state as somehow a negative thing. You know, if you look at the word straight white male became a pejorative of something negative, where male was a part of what was perceived to be a criticism. And what we've had is, you know, in the overall workplace, you know, men still overall earn more than women, but what we're seeing is a correction here, and that's only going to keep going further in that direction. And if unaddressed, the issue you'll have is if you have a generation of young men that aren't earning even close to what women are earning, those, you know, the same people that worry about young men turning to the far right or even the far left, you have to address this, because if it was happening in any other group, if it was young women or if it was any ethnic minority group,
it was young women.
Yeah, it was, and we addressed it. We took measures to improve that situation. So we have to look at it, but I've learned through experience of appearing on shows like this that when you bring this up, I'm sure it's not going to happen now, but there is resistance to the idea that men have life outcomes which can be negative, and particularly young men.
What do you think?
I mean, we know that men have poor life outcomes because we just need to look at the suicide rates, Storm.
Yeah.
So
Substance abuse.
Absolutely.
Rough sleeping.
Absolutely. Alcoholism. In terms of men's health in general, we know that men struggle. So, you know, I cannot take away from that. But my concern about this headline today is that what it does is it continues to divide men and women. It says, this headline is a negative headline, Storm. It talks about women earning more than men. What it doesn't do is it doesn't say, but of course, society, this is a blip. It's a tiny blip. And we've always known about this tiny blip where 16 to 24-year-old women earn more than men. It's the only time in their careers that they will ever earn more than men. And when we talk about what it is they're earning more than men, they're earning from anything from just over £1,000 to just over £2,000. So we're not talking about this massive amount of money.
I do think it's the start of something. You know, there's been a stat for a while that women are out-earning and out-learning men, right? This is something we also need to pay attention to. But I think if you look at what this issue of young men's failure to launch in life and the fact that less of them are in education as well, I personally think this is the start of a bigger turn towards a bigger, longer-term trend.
OK. All right, I'm going to get your thoughts on this after the break. Now, let's get back into whether feminism is bad for young men. So get those calls in now. 0207 862 2222 is the number. I'd love to hear your views on this. Maybe you've got a young boy at home that's really struggling, because there are lots of young men struggling. Now, when you say this is something that has to be addressed, Geoff, many people will agree with you that this is something we need to look at, particularly with the attainment of boys in schools and getting their grades up. But what actually practically can we do to help this situation? Because this isn't a new thing. Since women have been allowed into the classroom, they have been doing much better than boys. It's
a trend that's accelerated, certainly in particular over the last 20 years.
Yes.
And if you just look at the school environment, look, I used to be a teacher, and to say it's feminised would be an imperfect way of saying it, but there's certainly a tone of education. And part of the problem is not as many men want to be teachers as well. So particularly, you know, it starts in primary school.
More men as teachers.
Look, if you were looking at this from the other point of view, you would say, and this would be controversial, I don't think the government would touch it with a barge pole, but that you would financially incentivise male teachers to go into primary schools. That would be a potential policy, but that would cause massive tension between the workforces. But the problem, I think, is that acute. They don't have male role models, and also by the time they get into secondary education, if you look at the kind of subjects, the way people talk around things, you know, I did notice that it just seemed to be easier for girls to get on board. Girls just generally work harder in coursework, but there is a degree as well, as I'm saying this. young males do have to take responsibility for
Yes.
their academic performance, and that has to be drilled into them at a parental level.
Well, and also, in recent decades, we have seen the demise of manufacturing and traditional male jobs.
That's what I was trying to get at,
And so I suppose there is also an element that we are not opening up spaces for those boys, or maybe directing them into areas that we have availability.
I mean, we could fall on that argument, but then I would just respond by saying, when we look at the FTSE, 250 companies, of that, CEOs, 4% are women. So this is not just about we no longer have that manufacturing industry. We no longer have that industry that you would recognise as being a male-orientated industry, Storm, because all industries... you took the words right out of my mouth. All industries are male-orientated. Here's something controversial. How about we start by teaching our boys to not blame women for their failures? That is what we need to start doing, so that everybody understands that across the board, women are locked out, knocked out, pushed out in terms of achieving goals.
Isn't this part of the problem? And I've found this before, in any discussion about what's wrong with men, we end up talking about the issues with women. And in this short discussion, it'd be great if we could, just focus in on that. Because one thing I've noticed is if women face problems in society, one of the things that's often said is what is society doing to them? It's things that society has done to them. Whereas when we talk about young males, and I even did it myself a minute ago, I said they've got to work harder. We say, what are they doing to themselves? Because we view them as having agency and power over their lives. And if you're a young working class person, in a deprived area, do you have that agency? Are we applying expectations and analysis to them that we wouldn't apply to other marginalised and lower earning groups?
Interesting. OK, let's go to the calls and find out what you at home think. I would like to hear from some men as well. But we're going to start with Kelly from Buckinghamshire. What's your view when it comes to this gender gap? I mean, it's gender pay gap on both ends of the spectrum. For the younger people, women tend to be doing better. For the older generations, men are still leading the way.
Well, I don't think that feminism is actually the problem or bad for young men. I think, quite honestly, it's really the lack of leadership and guidance for young men. So if you look at a lot of young men, they're turning to people like Andrew Tate, who is teaching them how to be a young man or how to be a man. I think they're very thirsty for that kind of guidance, and they're turning to the wrong people. But Andrew Tate is a terrible role model.
I think we can all agree on that quite strongly.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, Kelly, when you look at...
that gentleman made the point of having more male teachers. Like, they need more men.
And I do hear that, but Paula also made a great counter-argument. Let's look at the FTSE 100. What percentage of those CEOs are men? Let's look at our prime ministers. What percentage of them
But this is
have
a
been
trend.
men?
We're talking about older men here.
Men lead the country.
I'm not talking about... Exactly. I'm not talking about taking away from women being successful.
No,
like
you're
I'm talking about. You're asking
Kelly,
about this crisis and suicide in young men, and they're not doing well and they're failing. Well, I don't think it has to do with feminism or that women are taking more of the share of the pie. I think it's that these young men need more guidance and role models
but I'm wondering,
help them.
But my question to you, Kelly, is how much more do they need? Because most of the CEOs in FTSE 100s are men. Most of our prime ministers have been men. Most of the people that run companies are men.
A change that's happening in a younger generation. So I suppose the point is that change got the likelihood to become an overcorrection? I guess that's why this is a new
I'm
story.
not talking about whether or not men need more help to become CEOs or be successful in business. I'm talking about what men need to be successful in life. There are so many young men that are so lost right now.
I take Kelly's point.
And we have to acknowledge that.
Is it about it's about a value system? It's about moral fibre. Andrew Tate comes up a lot. At first, I would say that if he's the one that we've heard of, there's a chance they've already moved on to somebody else, right? I'm not sure. He's also the symptom rather than the cause. And what is the cause is that, sadly, for about 10 years, we did have a dialogue around masculinity and toxic masculinity where people were not careful enough to distinguish between what they meant. And in a lot of cases, it just felt that they were describing masculinity in itself as some kind of poison state. It takes a while to roll back that kind of dialogue, but you've got a lot of young men who are hitting their early adult lives, and that's all they've heard. Hence, you get these figures, these poisonous figures online that step in and say, I'll say something positive about you, and that's why they go and listen to these guys.
Kelly, thank you very much for your call. Edward from Greater Manchester, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's basically to do with gender at the moment. The man has lost his identity throughout past, through past. A man used to be the hunter, and he had a specific task to do within the society, where the woman was the homemaker. But that is now starting to move forward, forward and away from men.
But that is what feminism is about. It's about an equality. So it's about getting rid of this idea that men have to be hunters and they have to provide and they have to be aggressive and they have to do all of these sorts of things, and women have to be caring and they have to be nurturing and they have to look after the children, and actually seeing everyone as individuals and a mixture of all of those attributes mixed up into one, and accepting that that is okay, and also just allowing people the same rights in the workplace and the same rights at home. And isn't that going to make it better for men? I mean, when we talk about suicide rates, men don't talk about their emotions enough because it's seen as feminine, it's seen as not masculine, and that's sort of what feminism is trying to do. It's trying to address all those things to make it better for men and women.
But feminine is becoming the primary focus for society, where men are still looking for, okay, fair enough, I agree with, and I do agree with women, but it's the question of, what do I do instead? Because let's face it, women are sort of getting to be adapted to do anything. They're like a universal robot nowadays.
Thank goodness for that. Edward, I just want to get one more call in. Thank you very much for your call. Benjamin from West Yorkshire. What's your view on feminism?
My view basically is, have we gone too far? Obviously, feminism was great when it first came about, and it empowered women and it gave them opportunities. But has that taken opportunities away from young boys?
Well, of course,
the young boys not get the same.
If you are the predominant power, Benjamin, equality is always going to feel like a persecution to you when equality is readdressed. Feminism is equality. Can equality, if things are equal, can that ever go too far?
Well, it can tip the balance. So I was looking at one government incentives for young girls to get into construction or to get into STEM science careers, and there are a lot of opportunities. But if you look at males to go into underrepresented male sectors of the workforce, there doesn't seem to be an equivalence there or any of that.
I would also argue that that's not feminism, because feminism isn't trying to make females dominate or give females more jobs. Feminism is trying to make things equal across the balance. So if the balance gets tipped, again, even in women's favour, not feminism.
I just think, even in the language that we talk about mental health, you say that men have problems talking about their feelings, but that's been around so long now. Even younger men feel like this, and perhaps there's just something within us that has a different relationship with talking. I remember when I first did talking therapies and counselling, the first counsellor I went to see said, it's okay to be weak. And even that, it scared me off. I didn't go back for a few weeks. There's a different language. And so therapy, the language of therapy in some way is shaped around a language that suits women more, who are more adept at talking about feelings with their friends and family.
But I suppose then we need to equalise that and make sure that the men have a therapy that works for them as well.
It's evolving. There's a lot. I'll just say, for any blokes are struggling out there, Google men's groups near me and you'll probably find something within 15 miles. I know it's hard, but there's loads of it like Andy's Man Club and Men's Shed that are doing great work.
Do you know what? Thank you very much, and we'll try and put that on their socials as well. It is really important. Do speak to somebody and do not suffer in silence.